You're listening to The Streaming Wars, the podcast that discusses all of the latest happenings regarding your favorite streaming services. Find out which service is winning the war this time around.
Hello everyone, welcome to the latest episode of The Streaming Wars. I am your host Dustin, and I have Tony with me as usual. We are here to talk about all the news related to the services from the week of November 6th to November 12th. We have a couple of different news topics to go over, a couple of different big topics such as the launch of Disney Plus. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to briefly talk about Apple TV Plus launching because we meant to talk about it in the last episode, and let's just put it as lightly as possible. It escaped us because nobody else really was talking about it either. So we have that, and then we're also going to talk about all the quarterly earnings from a lot of these companies, and Tony's going to give a rundown of the highlights as to how these things are going to pertain to these parent companies. Their financials are pertaining to the streaming services. So without further ado, let's get into the news topics from the past week. So first up, before we get into a lot of the other main stuff, there was a deal that got reached between Disney and Amazon to add the Disney Plus app to Fire TV devices. This had been there was the point of contention essentially was that Disney had some qualms with Amazon wanting some ad revenue from ads being published somewhere. I don't know where, because I honestly, I'm going to be completely honest here. I don't understand what exactly the point of contention was, because everything I read said it had to do with issues with ad revenue, but Disney Plus is completely ad free. So I don't know exactly where the ad revenue would be coming from. The only thing I could think of is maybe it's an ad in the Amazon interface by itself. I honestly don't know for sure. I don't personally have any Amazon Fire TV devices, I should say. I do have two of my children have Amazon Kids tablets, which are Fire, and they have Disney Plus on them. But anyway, long story short, Amazon and Disney made a deal. This was actually announced right before the quarterly earnings and the end of the year fiscal report that Disney released last week. So it was announced. You'll also be able to use Alexa to play specific shows on Disney Plus.
Another thing for Amazon to get their hands on. Just, always wanting our data. This is good. Amazon Fire, those devices, a lot of products. When you think of the major players in terms of streaming platforms, I guess you want to say, it's like Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire. So this was a deal that Disney had to make, and it's good that they got it done at least before the launch of their streaming service. So this is something they had to do, and I don't know why it took them so long, but I'm glad they got it done.
All right, so then another article that just popped up. This one was over at the Hollywood Reporter, and it was specifically talking about a new study that was forecasting subscriber rates for a lot of the streaming services, including Prime Video, Disney Plus, HBO Max, Apple TV Plus, and Netflix. I'm not going to go into the full details of this article. You can check it out yourself. There is some minor things here or there that are kind of I don't necessarily agree with, but it specifically says that by the end of 2025, there will be a total of 529 million subscribers on the 5 global video-on-demand platforms that I mentioned earlier. Their basic breakdown of this was that Netflix will have about 235 million subscribers, Amazon will have 135, Disney Plus will have 101, HBO Max will have 30 million, and Apple TV Plus will have 27 million. So obviously my main qualm with this is that somehow Apple TV Plus is going to have somewhere in the neighborhood of 27 million, while HBO Max is only going to have 30 million. It does say in the article itself that HBO Max will have 30 million paying subscribers, but non-payers are not included in this, and non-payers could actually triple the number. But then they also said that the same could be true for Apple TV Plus. But I have a hard time believing that while Apple TV Plus will clearly ramp up their content that they're able to offer over the next few years, I have a hard time believing that somebody as established as our library of content as HBO Max will only have about the exact same as Apple TV Plus. Now, I'm not sitting here saying that they're going to have, 100 million like Disney. I don't think that's the case at all. They could have way more content than Disney, and I still think that they would still have less just because of the price point. But I truly believe that It's a odd study, and you have to keep these. You have to take these for what they are, which is a forecast.
By 2025, they should be in international markets. So 30 million just doesn't even make sense. Just when you launch domestically, and then globally, you should have more than that. Just with how popular HBO and also like the Warner Brothers line, all that together. How popular that's going to be. Also, the only way I could see this happening is one, if they don't launch internationally by 2025 or close to then. And at&t, it's a little bit splintered right now. They're trying to consolidate all their different networks. So you got, at&t Now and HBO Go and HBO Now and then HBO Max. We've hit on that topic a couple times, so it's like if that's still splintered, I could see potentially that number, and so that number might be a little misleading because it's like, well, what is at&t's digital reach? That's probably a better question if you still have the splinter. But just like every study, you can't trust it unless you see the data and you can't see their methodology. For the past few weeks, for work, I read a bunch of research papers, some of the technologies. We try out these research papers and we look at what these scientists did, and a lot of the times these scientists just put up a bunch of junk, and so we tested out all these different things, and it just doesn't even work. And that's because we don't get to see their methodology, we don't get to see their data, we don't really get to see their process. And so especially with like surveys and different things, you can trust a little bit of the source. If you have imagine like an MIT, doing a study that carries a little bit more weight than some of these other analytics firms, but these numbers just don't even make sense. And how can you even forecast subscribers, to 2025 when Disney Plus just launched today? Apple TV launched like a week ago and everyone forgot. HBO Max doesn't even come out yet. You know what I mean? Like how can they give how can they predict these numbers with any type of certainty? It doesn't make sense. So just like everything else, question the data, question the methodology. There you go.
The only thing I can think of is that maybe they were going off of the trends of what's been talked about. I saw something else recently. There was another study that was done about a month ago that a bunch of media was talking about, and they said that Disney was on the higher end of people talking about and being aware of, and definitely looking towards subscribing to, and that all made sense. There's no question about that. I guess the question, of course, is why would have when they did that survey a month ago, why would anybody have been talking about HBO Max? They didn't know the price. They didn't know really what they were going to be getting, and they didn't even know when it was going to be available. I think ultimately you're not going to have any basis of any of this until these services are out for at least a year apiece in order to get a firm understanding of how many people are actually even remotely interested. And you can judge that based off of how many subscribers they actually have. But it all just comes down to there's no way of really gauging how these services are going to work until you have a significant amount of time to judge it off of. And at this point in time, it's way too early. So when you see something like this, like Tony said, you need to be careful about the information that they're presenting and where they're getting this information. All right, so the next bit of news is this was kind of interesting. This actually popped up the day before our last episode, but I didn't see it until afterwards. But there was an article that popped up over at the Hollywood Reporter claiming that there's a number of industry people that are teaming up together specifically to work against the idea of password sharing. If you are familiar with having a streaming service, you may or may not share your password with somebody else you know. And go ahead.
If I can interrupt, for the record, this is different from sharing your password with your family members.
Yes.
My girlfriend, she has my Netflix password, and we have kind of like a family account thing set up so she can watch her own thing. That's fine. But what this article is specifically talking about is people almost selling, their passwords online. HBO got really, there's a big thing with HBO and Game of Thrones, and people were posting links, posting, different access codes to their services and whatnot. So this is more illegal and illicit than the usual password sharing. I just felt like that was important to distinguish.
Yes, it is. It is very important. So basically, companies including Warner Brothers, Disney, Netflix, Sony, Paramount, and then smaller ones including AMC, Lionsgate, and MGM, as well as Amazon, are all part of a new group called ACE, which is a lobbying group. So the intent is that piracy 10 years ago, and I know that this is still happening now, but piracy used to be you're downloading stuff and you're sharing those files with somebody else. That was the main use of piracy. Now it's different. Now the method of piracy has become sharing your passwords with a number of people. It was actually asked during the HBO Max presentation at the very end during the Q&A. They were asked about how they were going to deal with password sharing, and they said that they were being a little bit lenient at this point in time, but if somebody's account was being used 15 times to watch the same exact thing at the same exact time at completely different locations, they could see those situations and then they could address those individually. No word as to how they would address them, because something like that hasn't come up at this point, but it is something that's going to become a big deal. There was also an article I guess it wasn't, I can't remember when the article posted, but there was an interview that was done with some of the people behind Disney Plus, and they also were asked about password sharing, and they specifically had the answer of, we understand that this service is a family service and a lot of people are going to have the passwords shared. We allow streaming on 4 separate devices. You can download items onto up to 10 different devices at once. So they're acknowledging the fact that it's something that happens. But at the same time, they also have to keep in mind as to how they can combat this, because supposedly, and I don't doubt this, billions of dollars are being lost to from these companies who have these streaming services because people are sharing their login information. I don't doubt that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not only are you're losing the content value, because back in the day people shared like Microsoft Office licensed passwords, and the only thing Microsoft was losing is pretty much that the revenue from that IP. The thing with streaming services and the passwords that's more important is streaming costs and infrastructure. The more you share, the more videos and content that are going to be watched, the more servers that are going to be utilized and stuff like that. So those costs actually add up more than just an Office subscription. That's why this is important. Is companies can really, really, really quickly lose a bunch of money if they're not efficient with their servers and stuff like that.
All right, so moving along, the next bit of news we have is there was a service called Stargate Command, which is the official streaming service of the Stargate universe. And this was basically, if you're not familiar with what Stargate is, it's, there was a sci-fi series that had a variety of different incarnations over the years, like Star Trek. But they had a paid service where they were offering TV shows and movies as well as original content. But this service has actually decided that they're no longer profitable, so they're going to be shutting down. They're shutting down.
Such a unique service. My dad would love this just because he loves everything Stargate. But my dad's a very small subgroup of streamers.
Yes, and the idea is that this is like the definition of a niche service. Probably niche of a niche service.
When I first heard this, I was like, you know what? That's interesting. If it was for free, I might check it out because I like the shows. But I couldn't actually believe that this was actually happening when it got released. I was like, this is the weirdest service I've ever seen.
All right, then the last bit of news we have is that BBC and ITV's BritBox streaming service has launched in the UK. I only brought this up. Obviously, we are based in the US. BritBox has been available in the US for 2 years now, but conveniently, the service is launched where the bulk of the TV shows originate, which is in England. Yeah, I just thought this was an amusing little bit of information. It was basically for $8 a month you can have access to shows like Downton Abbey, Broadchurch, Planet Earth, the Great British Bake Off, and then some of the other Doctor Who series. Now, interestingly enough, some of this programming will actually be available on HBO Max due to the contract that BBC has signed with HBO Max. So, I'm not sure how long this one will last, but for $8 a month, you can have this amazing service. I apologize for my sarcasm. With that being said, we're going to move into kind of some rundowns of some events that have happened. So first up, Apple TV Plus launched on November 1st. I mentioned it briefly on the last episode. I said, we're going to talk about Apple TV Plus later, and we never got to it because I missed it in the show notes, and I realized after the fact, I was like, well, there's no reason to go back to it because there's not much to say, because there really isn't. The biggest hiccup with Apple TV Plus was that just
no one knows about it.
Yeah, nobody knows about it. Nobody was really talking about it. The people who were talking about it were people who were looking to watch the shows immediately. Apple did not do such a great job of announcing when the service would actually launch, when would it go live, when you could watch these shows. They really announced any of that until after they were already up and live. The other part of it was the people who bought an Apple device and then in turn got a free year of Apple TV Plus. Nobody knew how to redeem their free year until after the service had launched. And that was a major concern for some people, where it wasn't until about 12 hours after the service had actually launched that Apple tweeted out and announced, hey, just go over to this website and you can redeem your free year, which they could have done at any other point and just made it go live as soon as everything else went live. But, it is what it is. I guess even a tech company as big as Apple can have some hiccups when it comes to rolling out a new piece of technology. So that's Apple TV Plus. Like I said, there's not much to say. We've talked about the shows before. The shows so far are not critically well received in general. There are some that stand out a little bit more, like we talked about before. For All Mankind is probably the best critically received series. But then at the same time, audiences who are watching the series seem to be liking the series and seem to be rating the series pretty well. So it's just a matter of, if you have the ability to watch it for free, go ahead and do so. If you want to check out some of these shows at this point, moving over to Disney Plus. So that launched this morning, and there was a little bit of a mixed understanding as far as how anything was going. So to give a little back history, let me just say this. Apple TV Plus, I did not personally subscribe to. I do not have a desire to personally subscribe to it anytime in the immediate future. Probably, maybe once Amazing Stories from Steven Spielberg rolls out, I might subscribe for a month or two, depending on that, because I do want to check out For All Mankind. I'd probably check out The Morning Show, and I definitely want to see Amazing Stories, but at this point in time, I don't have any desire to check out any of the other stuff, so it's not really worth my time to pay money to watch something. So use the 7-day free trial is my advice. Anyway, Disney Plus, however, I am a member of D23 and was offered a discounted rate for 3 years if I paid up front. And I did like 2 months ago. And so I've technically subscribed and paid for 3 years, but way before launch date. I didn't sign up today. I had signed up way ahead of time. Interestingly, Disney didn't send out any emails saying any times. However, they've had this countdown clock that has been going on for months now. They started this countdown clock actually back in, I want to say, April, when they initially announced the service or gave a lot more details for the service. They started this countdown clock, and the countdown clock basically went to expire at 8 a.m. Central Time on November 12th. However, as it turns out, there were some other countdown clocks that Marvel and Star Wars individually released that were contradicting the original countdown clock and giving a different time. So then there was a question of, okay, so is there the Marvel content dropping at a different time than the service? Is the Star Wars content, including Mandalorian, dropping at a different time? Nobody really knew. But then, so last night I went to bed. Before I went to bed, I checked Twitter, didn't see anything about it. I woke up pretty early this morning and happened to check Twitter to see a bunch of people saying that they had got onto the app very, very late in the evening, around midnight, and they started watching some of the episodes that, the new episodes. And I was like, okay, so I got up. At this point in time, it was about 5:30 in the morning. Go to my phone, check the phone to see if there's if I can download the app, and lo and behold, the app says it's not available in this country. Okay, so I go down to my Roku, and it is available on the Roku. So I download it on my Roku. I log in, and I get an error screen that says that it's currently down. And I was like, okay, so then I jump over to my Samsung Smart TV and look through their app store and see if it's there. And it is there. So I download it there and I log in and I get the same error screen. So then I go back to my phone to check, because at this point I'm running out of devices and I didn't really want to sit in front of the computer. I jump back over to my phone, and my phone, the app is now available. I was able to get in, and I was able to do pretty much everything I could through my phone, but there was still a lot of minor issues with loading, with login timeouts, and a variety of other things, just setting up profiles and things like that. Things weren't running very smoothly. Long story short, it eventually all worked itself out. There's still some minor issues. Later in the evening, I was able to watch a number of the shows without a whole lot of issues. I still had some audio issues with the syncing of the audio on my Samsung Smart TV, but the gist of it was they seem to have worked out a lot of the issues throughout the day. They did release a statement. They acknowledged the fact that there was issues, but they claimed that it was because they were not prepared for the extremely high anticipation of the service when it actually launched. So I tweeted this out earlier, which was basically, how could they not have understood how popular the service was going to be, especially for the point in time when it was become available? Because they have all these people that they've pre-sold 3-year subscriptions to. Anybody who probably bought the 3-year subscription at the discounted rate was probably going to be downloading the app and logging in as soon as they possibly could, because these are the diehard fans.
That stuff is hard to predict, especially, I mean, like, you checked this at, 8 a.m. or something like that? When I was at work and I saw you starting to live tweet this. When did you start looking into this?
Yeah, so it went from about 5:30 to about 8. And then at 8, I kind of left it alone for a little bit. And while that was really, really early, the catch is that supposedly the people who were using it very early in the morning, before even I did, had no issues. And there was a lot of reports that were saying, oh, the East Coast is having massive problems logging in. But it wasn't because of the East Coast. It was specifically for the East Coast. It just happened to be that the East Coast was waking up and logging in. The West Coast wasn't awake yet.
Yeah, I mean, there's that. This might be a little bit overkill. AWS, they have certain servers in certain regions. And so you have the East and the West. I think there's middle and the South or something like that. But yeah, the East region, there's a lot of traffic that comes through it. And you could potentially overwhelm that one sector if they didn't, kind of provision enough servers and whatnot. This stuff's hard to predict. It's hard to predict who's going to, you got authentication, a lot of people authenticating at the same time from different devices. So you got all that, mechanical software thing going on. They're going to have to deliver the content. So you have those servers. Then if they do anything like Netflix, Netflix on the fly chooses the right bitrate, chooses the right quality for your device so that you have a smooth experience. And Disney is going to be newer. They might not have that same functionality, but they're going to have something similar. So per device, they're going to figure out what's the best format. That's computationally expensive. And then you have to kind of calculate that. So it's hard to figure out those technical requirements. Yeah, you might have a bunch of people checking it out, but early in the morning, they just probably weren't expecting that. And so throughout the day, they were probably thinking, throughout the day, there's going to be some initial people, the diehards initially going to be like, I'm going to wake up and watch The Mandalorian and it's all going to be great. And then, throughout the day, they can, monitor the log situation. They can monitor all the metrics and be like, okay, like after a couple hours, things are settled. Let's see how everything is. And then they can go from there. Yeah, that stuff's hard. And so I'd give it a few days and everything should be fine.
Yeah, there is a lot of moving parts. And while I was live tweeting all of these issues that I was having, it was more just to add to the conversation of if anybody else has these issues, because initially when I started tweeting things out, nobody was saying anything about having issues. And I thought, how could I be the only one who's having issues? People were talking about how they have already watched The Mandalorian all the way through twice. And I'm like, how could this be? And I can't even get in. So it was more of me live tweeting for that reason. And I did round up my live tweet by saying specifically, while there are lots of people complaining that they can't get in, I saw a lot of people saying, oh, Disney, you better fix this. You better fix this. I'm paying money for this service. I don't think anybody really realizes that this is not actually the week that you're paying for. So while you may have prepaid for 3 years, your free trial starts today and goes till next week. Then you start your 3-year membership or your year-long membership. You still have that 7 days regardless of whether you pay or not. So they have that specifically in there so that they can work out the kinks. And I am completely aware of that. So while I had issues, I can acknowledge that nothing is going to start easily and without any sort of issues. If something does, then that company should really be applauded, but very rarely can they run into situations where there's not going to be issues. So while I'm listing off all the issues, it's not so much about the fact that I'm saying Disney, they dropped the ball or anything like that, because I don't know that that's entirely true. I think ultimately it just came down to they needed to gain a footing, and they couldn't gain the footing without having any sort of knowledge as to how many people are actually going to be using the service at any given time immediately at the time of launch or whatever. So I want to make that clear. I'm not trying to say that Disney screwed the pooch or anything like that by any means. I'm just trying to make sure that I put it out there that there was some issues. But I'm fully aware that, they got to work out the kinks, and I'm hoping that all the kinks get worked out. I'm also entirely thrilled with the fact that the service is available on these variety of different devices that I have, because if I was interested in Apple TV Plus to a much higher degree, I don't have an Apple phone. I can't watch Apple TV on my phone, so there's no way to do that. I can't Google Chromecast it to my phone because I can't do that. I can watch Apple TV on my Roku, but I only have that hooked up to one single TV that's not in my main living room, and the main TV I have in my living room doesn't have Apple TV as an option. So I couldn't even watch it on my main media setup if I wanted to, because of the way that they are limiting where the app is able to be used. So I acknowledge the fact that Disney, they've launched on way more devices. I mean, I really wanted to. I guess I could have booted up my PlayStation and tried to use the service through there. I could have jumped over to my son's phone, my kids' tablets. I didn't do any of that up front. I just was trying to get on the main situations that I would typically use myself. Now I can say it's on my Samsung Smart TV, it's on the Roku, it's on my kids' Amazon Fire tablets, it's on my Android phone. So I mean, it's all over the place.
Speaking on that, I guess we can go through this very quickly. How was your experience on those apps? Was it intuitive? Was it smooth? Was it a little bit buggy? I know you mentioned before the show that the audio didn't quite sync up in one of the services, but how did you feel throughout all those different apps?
Yeah, so for the most part, the interface doesn't change. I've noticed that it doesn't matter what service you're on, it's basically the same interface, which is good, but that's not always the case when it comes to some of the other services out there. So I just want to put that out there, because it is very, very similar, and the only minor things is based off of the screen size. But the Roku had no issues at all. I didn't have any issue, after the initial issues with just loading and things like that in the morning. When I got, just to be clear, everything I'm going to talk about now is about 12 hours after the service launched. So the service launched 12 hours later. Roku had no issues. We could do everything we needed to do. I didn't really run into any buggy issues. On my phone, I had no issues either. There was no problems with the Android app. There was no issues with, streaming it through Chromecast. None of that stuff had any issues. The app on the Samsung Smart TV, like I said, there were some audio issues. There were some minor loading issues. The one thing I did notice on all the apps that we were using was that, and I don't know if this is the case, but when I started a show and I would be in a certain amount of time into it, and I would exit out and I would go back in, it would restart the show. Now, I'm used to Netflix and Prime Video. If you start something and you exit out, it saves your spot and you go back. So I don't know if that's something that is just happening now and will get fixed, but that was something I noticed. My children have Amazon Fire tablets. There wasn't really any issues with that. There were some loading issues minorly, but I think that had to do with just the storage space that was available on the tablets.
Was the experience intuitive? I know you deal a little bit more with tech stuff, so you're a little bit more tech savvy than maybe the common person, but did you feel like it was easy to use for people?
Yeah, I think it was extremely easy to use. I think it's very streamlined in the sense of there's not too much to it. It is kind of cool because if you pull up an older movie that has been released on DVD, they do have the special features all, preloaded, so you can watch them as well in addition to the main feature, which is kind of cool because that's not something you see in a lot of other services. I did scroll through the entire library of the TV series and the films that they had, and there was a lot of stuff there that I didn't remember necessarily seeing on the lists that were, being spread around from the stuff that the Netherlands had. and I thought that was kind of interesting. Interestingly, there was a lot of movies that I noticed that had a place card that you could click on, you could watch the trailer, but you couldn't watch the movie itself, and that's because the movies are currently tied up elsewhere. I had sent out a tweet or a series of tweets about movies that are currently showing up on Disney Plus, but you can't watch them. But they do have a spot that says you can add these to your watch list, and you'll see them when they're available. And they did list the dates that they are hypothetically going to be available. And while a lot of places out there were reporting that Netflix's deal was done in 2019, that is true, but the rights to individual movies run out at a specific time for each movie, not just all movies are open to be used after 2019. So there was like, I want to say 8 different movies, some of them Marvel. There was a couple of other recent movies that had released that aren't available on the service, but showed a spot where you could at least add them to your thing. But nothing that showed up was outside of 2020. Anything that shows up, the only other real quick thing to mention about it was that I did notice that anything that recently released. So Dumbo is probably the most recent Disney release that's on the service. However, other than like maybe Captain Marvel, but anything that's come out more recently, like the one that came to mind was the live action Aladdin, which released at the end of May. There was no spot for that saying when that was coming to the service, even though it will be coming to the service after that 6-month window after the releases. So these films will make it their way to the service. It's just a matter of giving it some time. So that's the basic gist of Disney Plus. If you haven't subscribed, you can try out the free trial over there as well. They have a 7-day free trial. There's definitely a lot of content there. Not as much as if you're going to go to Netflix, but there is a lot of content, a lot of TV series, a lot of movies that you'll probably remember at least 1 or 2 from at some point in your life. So definitely check that out if you haven't. So our main discussion on this episode, outside of those 2 services and talking about those, is that recently the quarterly earnings have been released for a lot of the different companies. Now going forward, no, we didn't realize this at the time. We assumed that all these companies would release their quarterly earnings around at least the same time, but that didn't seem to be the case. Different companies are releasing them, and their fiscal years are different, but then there's also the reporting dates for some of these companies are vastly different. So going forward, we'll round up some of these companies in as they release individually, since even today covering all of the companies that we're covering, which is the parent companies behind the major services, those quarterly earnings spread out for almost 6 weeks. So in the future, we'll cover them as we get them. But we wanted to make sure we started off covering all of the earnings up to this point that have released, specifically because we've talked about how this is one of the things that is very important. And as we talk a lot about the tech side of things, a lot of this stuff has to do with the business side of things as well. So Tony's going to do the best job he possibly can of rounding this up. So Tony, take it away.
Yes. So first off, just looking into these reports and looking into the news and looking into all the SEC filings, it is as boring as it could possibly be. Yeah, I get made fun of a lot because I study math, and people were like, "Yeah, man, you must love math," but man, it's like super boring, and I hate it. It is boring. I mean, I enjoyed it, but it is boring. I enjoy this stuff, but man, SEC filings are boring. So looking into this stuff, just going to high level. Let's start with Disney. So usually, I would have thought, companies report their financials per quarter. If you split up the year in quarters, that would be every 3 months. And the end of the third quarter was October. For Disney, that was not the case. Disney's third quarter is actually at a different time. And Dustin politely told me that I was very wrong about a week ago. And I was very surprised. So Disney's report, a lot of the information comes around a couple different August articles, which is obviously before Disney Plus. Honestly, like a lot of these companies, as we're going to get into them, they haven't really launched their services yet, or they're like barely anything. So there's not going to be any real data on that. Talking about Disney, they missed Wall Street's estimates. So not only do these companies have their own internal, estimations that they have to provide of the growth of the company, where they're supposed to be, right? Wall Street and analytics firms and, private equity firms and fund managers and stuff like that, they look into these companies that they're investing in, and they run their own numbers, and they have, certain estimates. And for the most part, like, yeah, some companies like miss the Wall Street estimates, but it's very interesting to how both sides basically come to the same number for a lot of the times. So they didn't miss Wall Street's estimates, but it wasn't that bad. Disney says that this is due to the Fox deal and integrating those assets within, the company proper. So the studio division actually, is above expectations. So once again, this is around August due to the unprecedented success of Endgame, and, Captain Marvel got $1 billion. Endgame got to $2 billion, which is just ridiculous. The Lion King got like over $1 billion. Is that right, Dustin? Like, it was way more than I thought it would.
Yes, it was way over $1 billion.
Goodness sakes, that's crazy. I wouldn't have thought that. Yeah, and so with those movies and like Dumbo and other things, the studio division had a crazy year. And honestly, this isn't even including The Rise of the Skywalker, the Star Wars movie that's coming out in a few weeks.
Or Frozen, which Frozen 2 is coming out too.
Yeah, I forget. Yeah, Frozen 2, man, that's going to make $1 billion. Yeah, so not even including those two movies, they killed the box office this year. The studio division's doing great. They kicked off. The studio division's also making a lot of content for the Disney Plus, so that's also pretty well. The direct-to-consumer, side of the business had substantial losses. Disney says this is due to Hulu and increased investments in ESPN Plus and Disney Plus. Disney Plus investments, obviously this would be infrastructure, obviously licensing costs, but a lot of this is, getting the software right, getting the servers and stuff like that well, and planning, and that takes a lot of infrastructure. The company also said it expects the direct-to-consumer losses to rise to about $900 million in the fiscal fourth quarter as it continues to invest in content for Disney Plus. Cable networks revenues jumped 24% from last year third quarter to present, year over year, to $4.5 billion during the quarter. The company said that the higher operating income was due to the consolidation of Fox's FX, National and Geographic networks, as well as higher advertising revenues at ESPN, and this was driven by 2 additional NBA Finals games. So NBA Finals, for most major sports like championship series, they split between different networks, and so they got 2 NBA Finals games, which drawn a lot of people to watch. So it also noticed an increase in programming and production costs and contractual rate increases for MLB and NBA. ESPN Plus is ESPN for the longest time was decreasing in revenue. They put a lot more efforts into ESPN and kind of modernizing that, and it started to come about. So that's pretty awesome. So moving to Amazon. Amazon's third quarter was a tad lower than estimated. And what's really important about Amazon is if you look into the business proper, Amazon, you could almost say is broken up into a few different, it's almost like a conglomerate for all these different businesses. You have AWS, you have their marketplace, you have their own Amazon brands. Not only the marketplace and merchants in the marketplace, there also are the merchants selling stuff. You also have the Prime Video and streaming content side of the business. So Amazon's pretty big. So AWS missed its estimates. Amazon Web Services revenue was the catalyst for recent growth. So Amazon, for the longest time, either didn't make much or it actually lost a little bit of money. Although Amazon grew to be huge in terms of like market share and revenue, but it didn't actually like turn a profit or as much profit as, Wall Street really wanted. Now, when they started their AWS business, AWS basically, a lot of the internet runs on these servers. This is extremely lucrative for Amazon proper. So Amazon, because of AWS, has turned to, very profitable. Shareholders are happy. And so a lot of this extra revenue kind of helps out other parts of the business. Amazon's ad department, which they have an ad department, was the third most digital ad sales in the US after Google and Facebook. I had no clue that was a thing. One-day shipping was a success and drove a lot of the sales. Evidently, there's a one-day shipping. For most of the year, I didn't have Prime, so I missed out on that. However, one-day shipping is costly, which makes sense. Amazon is also kind of getting the business of ditching UPS and FedEx and renting their own trucks and trying to do their own delivery that way. Unfortunately, Amazon doesn't release Prime Video subscribers, which this is going to become an issue as we get into more, streaming services and streaming providers. They might not give us all the numbers, so that may be a little bit annoying. Even though they missed their numbers, this isn't the first time Amazon has underwhelmed Wall Street. So it seems like most of their profit comes from AWS. When I look at this and see what's going on, they've invested a whole lot in Amazon Prime recently. A lot more big budget content. I mean, Jack Ryan, that's a very well produced series, and The Man in High Castle is coming to an end, all that different stuff. And they bid on like the new Lord of the Rings series. So they're shelling out lots of money. And just since we don't have the subscriber numbers, we don't see how the relationship between Prime Video affects, Prime subscriptions. We want to see that metric of, okay, Prime subscriptions cost $100 a year and you get a whole bunch of different things. How many people are signing up for Prime subscriptions because of Prime Video? You can almost say that Prime Video is advertising for Amazon Prime in general. Amazon Prime makes a whole lot of money. Every year they get paid $100 by all those people who get the service. That's a crap ton of money. But if AWS falls, right, if it doesn't hit its market share, Amazon might have to cut costs, and Prime Video might be the thing where they scale back a bit because they spend a whole bunch of money into it. So Amazon might be like, you know what, we're gonna pull a little bit back. So that's the only thing I worry about. The streaming service is kind of tied to AWS and stuff like that. So
I think the issue with them not releasing the Prime Video subscriber counts, it comes down to this. You can't subscribe to Prime Video by itself. You have to subscribe to Amazon Prime. Prime Video just happens to be a perk of subscribing to Amazon Prime as a service. So while you are going to be getting Prime Video, they can't really sit there and say, well, we have X amount of video subscribers, because they don't offer it singularly by itself. So I think that when it comes to Prime as a whole, they do have Prime numbers, and they do release how many Prime subscribers they have. That number is readily available, and you can just translate that straight over to, okay, well, that same number is using Prime Video, but we, of course, don't know that. It'll be more interesting to see when Nielsen starts getting ratings for some of these shows, because Amazon is one of the few companies that's willing to let Nielsen into their information to show how many people are actually watching their stuff. That's the only way we're going to find out how many people are actually using the Prime Video side of it, out of that 100-something million people that are subscribed to Amazon Prime.
Well, they could give out numbers like how many unique viewers, which that's readily available because they get information from get your information from everywhere because they're big tech. But yeah, they can tell which are unique users versus non-unique. Now that might not imply how many people get Prime for Prime Video, but you could actually see a number of, okay, how many people are actually using the service. Doesn't mean that they actually subscribed.
Right, and I definitely see. I think the problem is that just for the longest time, I think these companies have worked in the sense of, we don't want people to actually know how many people are watching these shows. Because
which is weird, because like as a investor, as a stockholder, I would want to know.
And that's why,
between Prime Video and Prime, like is this venture worth it? Even though like we may not have to release those numbers publicly, but it doesn't seem like even stakeholders know these numbers, which is not good. Even I heard Netflix, even the creators don't necessarily know their numbers. I know for Orange is the New Black, the creator was like, yeah, like we make the series, but we don't know the numbers. We don't know if people are actually watching the show, which is, I think, just weird. But.
And I agree, but I think that I think part of the problem is that the shows in general, like the way these companies look at these shows that they have, is like Netflix looks at as, we need to reduce the churn rate. We need to keep pumping out content so that people don't unsubscribe from the service. If we have content and there's enough content for people to constantly watch, they're not going to unsubscribe. They're looking at it from that perspective. Amazon's looking at it from the perspective of Prime Video as a added benefit to keep people as Prime members, which will in turn, and here's an interesting fact. So if you are a Amazon Prime subscriber, you are actually more than 50% more likely to spend more money on Amazon than if you don't have a subscription to Amazon Prime. And the reason being is because you're not paying for shipping. So psychologically, you're thinking you're saving money, but really you're just going to Amazon more often to make your purchases. It's the same principle as Prime Video is there as a tool to keep people to keep subscribing to Amazon Prime, which in turn will keep them spending their money on Amazon rather than spending it elsewhere. So the thing is, these companies,
it could be a very expensive way to get people to stay with Prime. And
I don't disagree whatsoever. I think, but the thing is, Amazon doesn't look at it as, they don't look at those expenses. the same way as a normal company. I think a lot of these companies nowadays are looking at things very differently than you would have. You've got at&t touting that they're going to offer potentially 30 million people the ability to have HBO Max for free because it will keep them paying their ongoing bills of either their unlimited wireless every single month or the other services that they offer. It will keep these people paying the other amount of money. So they're looking at it as, well, this is an expense, but it's driving profit elsewhere. And I think that's the same thing with a lot of these companies. Prime Video is a perfect example of they're not probably making a whole lot of money at all from Prime Video individually, but they're looking at it as it's a perk that people actually use, maybe in some cases more than maybe the audiobooks or the music side of the other, some of the other perks that come with Amazon Prime. If they're using that service more than the others, maybe it is worth it because, while there's, and I don't know that I don't disagree. I think investors should be told how these services are doing and how they relate. But it's the same thing as Disney saying, well, we're not going to tell everybody how many people are actually watching our shows. They'll do the same thing Netflix did for years, which is they'll tout out a couple of shows that do really well, and they'll say X amount of people watch this show within the first 30 days it was out, and they'll have these like small figures that make them look really good, but because they control them, they don't have to talk about the stuff that doesn't make them look good. And I don't know that that's going to change anytime in the near future, because then you've got investors speaking too much about what they should and should not be creating, and I don't know that they want that to happen. So
that is a good point. So to segue into Comcast, which is one of the big companies, Comcast beat Wall Street's estimates. It was the fifth consecutive quarter where it beat the estimates. So theatrical revenue for NBC Universal slumped about 9%, 8.8% from a year earlier. The company blamed the decline on the strength of film releases in the third quarter, including Jurassic World, Fallen Kingdom, Mamma Mia. Comcast noted that the decline was partially offset by the release of the Hobbs and Shaw Fast and Furious movie. So there was a bunch of declines, underwhelming performances, but Hobbs and Shaw kind of helped balance that budget a little bit. The filmed entertainment division brought in $1.71 billion in revenue, which is a 6.2% decrease from the previous year, which that's a statistically significant amount. Cable networks revenue decreased 2.8% to $2.8 billion in the third quarter. And this reflects lower content licensing and other revenue. And this was partially offset by higher distribution revenue. The broadcast TV revenue decreased 9.1%. Wow. In the third quarter, reflecting a decrease in advertising and content licensing revenue, again, partially offset by increased distribution and other revenue. So I basically spent a few minutes talking about how all of Comcast's, essentially media divisions sucked. If it beat Wall Street estimates, but essentially all the streaming content, provider stuff underperformed, some vastly. What this implies is that Comcast's other businesses really floated the company for this quarter. So I don't know what to expect from that, but that doesn't give me hope, for Comcast. I'm not saying like all is lost, but that is definitely an interesting story to keep your eye on. So after that, moving to at&t. at&t's looking into this. It's a very interesting stock report, and I sent it to Dustin, and it was very nice and detailed. We've mentioned a few of these topics before, but at&t has other businesses. at&t is a whole slightly underperformed estimates. So at&t has a lot of debt. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad debt. It just means that they have a lot of debt. Some investors are a little bit worried. There's one activist investor, the Elliott Management, and it called on at&t to cut cost, unload some debt, and scale back its expansion. They pushed to add a few board members. They convinced the CEO to stay a little bit. I know Dustin has a little bit more firsthand knowledge because he watched the at&t, kind of investor summit or whatever. So Elliott's kind of been pushing for them to offload some of the debt. So they've been trying to sell off a bunch of their assets. So to reduce its debt pile of $153 billion, at the end of the third quarter, at&t has been on a selling spree, and it sold its assets in Puerto Rico for $1.95 billion. AT&T has decided to sell their broadcaster Central European Media Enterprises in a cash deal for about $2 billion. So they're selling off, and they're doing pretty well. The company expects to generate $14 billion through the asset sales and other initiatives at the end of the year. So far, it's reduced its net debt by $12.7 billion. So out of the whole $154 billion, AT&T's just been on a spree to sell off assets and to recoup that money. At this point, they've recouped a net of $13 billion and expect to generate $14 billion through asset sales. So that's kind of the summary of all those numbers. So the entertainment group, to break it down, was down about 3.4%. And this was, declines in premium TV subscribers and legacy services. The Warner Media as a whole, revenues were down 4.4%. Primarily, this was driven by lower Warner Brothers, like the actual studios revenues, which were partially offset by HBO and Turner. The Turner side, revenues were up about 0.5%, and this was due to increases in subscription revenues, which is pretty good. Advertising revenue decreased, but this was offset by higher pricing. So advertising dollars went down, they raised the prices, so that offset. So that's all good, which is kind of interesting. Since they raised the prices, they still had an increase in subscription revenues. Sometimes when you raise the price, your subscription numbers will go down because people are like, hey, that's too expensive, I'm gonna get out. So HBO revenues were up 10.6% according from last year's third quarter, 11%. That is good, reflecting on increases in content and other revenues, and a 1.1% increase in subscription revenues. So HBO, great for them. This was increased due to digital and international growth. Really good. So the Warner Brothers division revenue went down about 10.4% from last quarter, and this is due to declines in theatrical and television revenues. These were partially offset by games and other revenues. They've had some shakeups. They're moving in a new direction. Warner Brothers is important to Warner Brothers, HBO, and Turner collectively are important for AT&T's new strategy. Since they're losing, their TV customers, subscribers, they need to find a way to offset those subscriber numbers. So they're gonna use HBO Max to kind of, if you want to think about it, transition their subscriber base from cable networks to this streaming platform. So that's kind of their vision. That's kind of their goal. And because of new subscribers into their HBO Max and other, bundle stuff, it's also going to help their broadband and their mobile services. So that's where AT&T is going. That's where investors want them to go. And I think that's a really good future for AT&T. So the last one we're going to talk about is Netflix. Now, Netflix is, in comparison to all these other companies, is a pure streaming service platform. So they beat Wall Street's expectations. They added about 6.8 million paid subscribers globally in the third quarter, which is in line with what Wall Street kind of estimated. But this was slightly below the company's own 7 million estimation, which nearly 6.3% of those, 6.3 million of those were actually from international, which is significantly above the 6 million Wall Street analysts projected. But the company missed its subscriber total in the US, which is their single largest market. This is potentially due to they announced price hikes earlier in the year. The miss came after Netflix, lost subscribers for the first time since 2011 during the second quarter. So they've been on a hot run for a long time. This is the first time in a while where they had a bad quarter. Doesn't mean that everything's over, just means bad quarter. Netflix blamed due to a content slate that failed to deliver. So during their second quarter, they had a bad quarter, and this was important to their content slate. Their third quarter, it rained up releases for the new seasons for popular shows like Stranger Things, La Casa de Papel, which is Money Heist, and Orange is the New Black, which is in its final season. So CEO Reed Hastings downplayed the threat of the new streaming services. I guess we can end on this last sentence, and it didn't. Texas to Dustin, we're talking about it. CEO Reed Hastings downplayed the threat of the new streaming services, saying that the company's earnings call that ultimately they do not represent a big change in the competitive landscape. Instead, he said linear TV providers continue to represent Netflix's biggest rival. Quote, "We're all relatively small compared to linear TV, so we're not really competing with each other, but with broadcast." So to end this very long, almost rant of financial earnings and kind of overviewing each company, do you think, according to Reed Hastings, that the biggest challenger for Netflix isn't these other people. It is linear TV. So should there even be a streaming wars almost? According to Netflix, they say no, that these other people don't even matter. Even if they had, subscribers, it's still linear TV, which I don't think that's true. What are your thoughts?
I don't think it's true either. I think that it comes down to he needs to downplay these other services, because if the other services are successful, he has to downplay the fact that his service isn't doing as well as some of these up and coming ones and their growth rate, specifically for the growth rate, because Disney Plus, Apple TV Plus, eventually HBO Max, none of them are going to get up to 150 million subscribers right away. It's going to take time. But what's more important is that the growth rate. If Disney Plus says that they end up getting, let's say, 2 to 5 million subscribers in the first quarter that the service is available, meanwhile Netflix drops their subscriber count, and it just so happens that they drop it between 2 and 5 million, it then comes across as, well, those subscribers probably left Netflix and moved over to Disney Plus. Now, he doesn't want that narrative. He wants the narrative of these other services are here, but really our main competition is linear TV. It's like the idea of you've got a battle. Do you pick a fight with the people who are the same size as you, or do you go after the big one that the other ones might cower to as well? And I think his thought process is, well, I'm going to go after the big bully, which is linear TV, and we're just helping out all these other guys alongside us. And once linear TV is out of the picture, then really it's a competitive landscape between just us streaming services. But that's not really what it is. That's not it at all.
I know some of it was theater because, he's in front of investors and he has to say something that is assuring, So, there's that part of the theater, but I personally just didn't think of linear TV anymore being a threat because, one part of it is just, those numbers are going down. AT&T is bleeding subscribers. Comcast is, bleeding those types of subscribers. And so that's how come they're moving into the streaming part of their services. Linear TV doesn't really seem like that's the issue since a lot of these bigger, ISPs are moving to streaming. So yeah, linear TV might be going down, but these companies have streaming services which are going to be on the rise. So it's like you're winning one battle, but really losing others because, you might think you're taking down this enemy, but really they just shifted. Yeah, that's the rundown for all those quarterly earnings. If you have any questions, please reach out. I know that talking about numbers and statistics and stuff like that can be a little bit dry. If you have any questions, reach out. We'll try to give a little bit more succinct answer.
And obviously, because we are talking about earnings reports and things like that, nothing that we're saying here should be taken as any sort of information to judge which stocks you should buy or should sell. I just want to put that out there because we are not financial planners at all. So literally just trying to follow these businesses and how it relates to the tech side of things and these specific services that we're covering. So just want to make sure that's clear. That said, that is going to wrap up this episode. I want to encourage you guys to leave reviews over on iTunes or any of the other podcast platforms that you're currently listening to this. We greatly appreciate all the listeners that we do have. If you have, as the streaming wars pick up and more and more people are subscribing, Disney Plus is obviously going to be in the news a lot. Please, if you have other friends who are interested in hearing about the streaming services and interested in hearing more about these kinds of things, please suggest the show over to them. That would be greatly appreciated. And you can also support us just by obviously leaving us those reviews because those help us get noticed, when people are searching for shows dealing with the streaming service as well. You can follow us on Twitter and our Discord for all the news articles that we are constantly finding and we discuss here on the podcast. We post those over on our Twitter and our Discord. Instagram, we have specifically set up so that you can find out every time there's a new episode related to, or every time there's a new podcast episode. You can listen to these at every podcast platform you can imagine, as well as over on YouTube. You can email us any questions about this episode or any topics you'd like us to discuss in the future at thestreamingwars@gmail.com. In addition to that, I haven't mentioned this a lot, but I'll mention it this time around. We do have a Patreon set up. If you are so inclined in supporting the show, definitely check that out. The link is over on the site. And as I've said in the last 2 episodes at least, we do have the streaming services release calendar over on the website for all of the new content that's constantly coming out. We're constantly updating that so that you guys can find out which content you should check out. So definitely check that out, and please share that as well. So with all of that being said, for Tony and myself, this has been the Streaming Wars, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks for listening to the Streaming Wars. Check us out on Twitter and Instagram. Also, consider supporting us on Patreon. Links can be found at thestreamingwars.io.